An intellectual carrot. The mind boggles.
You see? You see? You're stupid minds. Stupid! Stupid!
Earth has had Santa Claus long enough. We will bring him to Mars.
I've been afraid a lot of times in my life, but I didn't know the real meaning of fear until I had kissed Becky.
One thing will be clear. It's not for man to interfere in the ways of God.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Earth vs. Soup, episode 143. I'm Aaron Pollier.
I'm Darlene.
We watched a good movie today. We watched a good one.
Yes, I didn't even know it was... It was just written on my... I went through Prime to look for things.
Amazon Prime
to look for movies that were free.
Mm-hmm.
And this was about a week ago, and I found this one, and I wrote it down, and we didn't even know it was Karloff.
It's a Boris Karloff movie. But here's the thing. It has a really dumb-sounding name, so I immediately thought that it was actually going to be a Japanese film, just because of the name.
Die Monster Die, 1965. Well, it was released in the U.S. as in 1965 in October, but waited until February to put it in 1966 UK.
Sure. Now, this is an interesting movie, because as soon as it opens, you can tell it's British. I looked to you and I said, Darlene, this is a British movie. It looks like a British movie. It sounds like a British movie. The film stock is British.
But it comes up with American International.
Yeah, and you're like, no, Aaron, it's not British. And I'm like, Darlene, it's British. Then the first scene happens and the guy gets off the train and walks into the village that we've already seen, because it's the same village that was used in the movie that we reviewed called The Earth Dies Screaming from 1964, episode 71, which is in Surrey, England. And I'm like, that's the exact same street, Darlene. This is England. You're like, okay, I guess.
Okay, this is The Color Out of Time.
Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft.
Out of Space.
And you haven't read that story, you need
H.P. Lovecraft.
It's based on
80 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
It double featured with Planet of the Vampire,
which I think we've done, haven't we?
I don't think we have.
Maybe, I don't know. I'd have to look. I always get Planet of the Vampires mixed up with Journey to the Seventh Planet for some reason. And I know we've done Journey to the Seventh Planet. Anyway, this movie has a couple really interesting connections to other movies we've done or pop culture in general. Okay, so I've already talked about how it has this kind of setting link. The same studio was used to film, the studio and village was used to film The Earth Dies Screaming. So we recognize a lot of the little things in it. Boris Karloff is in this movie. Of course, Boris Karloff is very old at this point. He has a very bad back, and he's confined to a wheelchair in this. Well, not confined, I should say. He's in a wheelchair for most of it. But he still has a presence. Like, he still has that presence that he has in the 30s.
This is 4 years before he dies.
Yeah, so he's not doing well. The director in this, he only really did TV stuff. Did a lot of TV stuff.
He did do one that we might be looking into.
Well, Dunwich Horror. He did direct the Dunwich Horror, which I assume has to be from the same studio. Well, here's the thing. The main actress in this, the love interest, is Susan Farmer. Now, I thought she has that kind of look that most British actresses of the mid-60s have, right? Like, so I thought I recognized her from somewhere. It turns out I don't. But back in the mid-60s, when this was being filmed, she was married to Ian McShane, believe it or not. And you would know Ian McShane, Darlene. Even though you don't know actors, you forget names, you would know Ian McShane as Winston from all the John Wick movies, the guy that owns the Continental, well, runs the Continental.
Okay.
Or Al Swearingen from Deadwood, Mr. Wednesday from American Gods. An extremely good actor. They were divorced back in the mid-60s as well, but she was married to him. And then the last kind of strange connection is the writer of the screenplay for this movie is Jerry Sull, And Jerry Soule ended up writing 3 episodes of the original series of Star Trek, Whom Gods Destroy, This Side of Paradise, and the Corbomite Maneuver.
There's a Frankenstein one that we don't know.
He wrote the synopsis for Frankenstein versus Baragon, Darlene.
What's Baragon?
A kaiju. It's a Japanese film. Yes,
I thought so.
That is one of the worst. But he didn't write that movie. He wrote the synopsis for it, I guess, for Americans. Okay, so we both had not seen this movie before. I will say immediately that there are so many moments in this movie that reminds me of Day of the Triffids, because obviously it's a British movie. It has those kind of Britishisms in it. The quality of the film stock, the way it's paced, you can tell that this is a British movie. So it hit that button for me that Day of the Triffids
and the
did.
sets are definitely British.
Oh, I actually felt while watching this that this could have been Hammer.
Yeah, but
with
Hammer
the quality
is
of the
British.
sets. Yeah, but yeah, you can tell that these sets are British. The only things that I feel stand up to the same level as Hammer horror sets are, let's say, Universal sets from the golden age of Universal horror films. Those are the only sets that are somewhat at the same level as Hammer horror, and they had to have actually borrowed things from Hammer horror, because the sets here are fantastic. The set dressing is fantastic. I know we're not even talking about the plot yet, but we're gushing about this movie, and there's a reason.
It's got a great matte painting.
There's great matte paintings all the way through.
It's got a great set. It's great atmosphere, and
yes,
they used a lot of either smoke or ice to get the fog.
Dry ice, yeah. So let's talk about the plot again. If you've read H.P. Lovecraft's The Color from Space, you know the plot to this movie. Believe it or not, I actually enjoy reading H.P. Lovecraft. I'm not like the biggest fan, but I've read most of his major works, including Color from Space. I have not seen the Nick Cage version of Color from Outer Space, from Beyond Space or whatever. I have not seen that. It was recently released, and supposedly it was good, but I'm not a giant fan of modern Lovecraft stories. I think that they're a little too much gore rather than existential dread, where I think Lovecraft works the best with existential dread.
And this did it.
I think this did it fairly well. So let's get into the plot.
The train.
So we're introduced to the American. Now this guy is named Stephen Reinhardt. We don't know his name immediately, but this is Stephen Reinhardt, and he gets off the train at the Arkham station somewhere in England.
Yes, the thing
cute,
says Arkham.
Cute. Okay, great Lovecraft reference. And this is where we immediately see that this is the same village from The Earth Dies Screaming. Okay, he's wandering around going, "Hey, I need to go out to the Whitley estate. I need to get a car. Like, can I rent a car? Can I hire a taxi? Can I rent a bike?" And every time he talks to somebody, people just laugh at him or tell him to get the hell out.
Well, the laughing came from the drunks.
Yeah, like, oh, he doesn't know what's
tavern.
wrong out there, blah, blah, blah. So everyone was pretty much acting like jackasses to this guy.
Yeah, I didn't understand why anyone wouldn't say why.
Something.
And it never came out.
Yeah. Why is it a big deal? No one. There's no reason.
But the bicycle guy says the only way you're going to get to
the Whitley estate is
by
walking.
by your
own feet.
2 feet, and he does. He ends up having to walk.
Yes, and we learn later on that it's actually supposedly quite a long walk. Like, it's many, many miles to get out to this place. And we see him walking out there through some map paintings, some fairly well done map paintings. I can't say they're like the best, but they will go in my list of things that work.
Well, the one that was really shocking was the one that the map painting has everything around him.
You can tell it's a map painting, and it's like this tiny little circle around him walking down a lane, but everything else is a map painting, and it's fairly well done. It's fairly well done. You can tell with your modern eye. By the way, we watch this on Amazon Prime, right, for free, so you can watch it yourself. And I guess when it's cleaned up, if this was on like a movie theater screen from 1965, I doubt that we would have been able to tell that was a matte painting.
No, we probably wouldn't, but we do have HD.
Yeah, and that HD shows a lot of the sins that movies got away with back in the day. Because I mean, if the movie on the screen was just slightly out of focus, even slightly, no way you would have been able to tell, in my opinion. So he walks out there and ends up going through this region of like dead trees where the trees are literally turning to like dust. To me, it looked like he had like rye bread in his hand, though. I'll be fair about that.
I've actually seen rotting on the ground, rotting twigs do that. So they must have did that because that had all the look to as a rotten tree.
Okay.
When he breaks it off, put on in quotes, and he has it in his hand and he's rubbing the fingers through it. It applies just like compost.
All right, so to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense with what we know later on.
Yes, it doesn't, but
the movie's not perfect, but folks, I loved this movie. So take my criticisms with like the understanding that I'm doing this from a place of love at this point, because this movie I truly enjoyed. There's this area where everything is dead. He walks out from it after testing the trees, and he walks into an area that's more alive. The trees are alive. It's like this country lane, and he finally comes up to the gate of the Whitley estate.
And it's got a big, huge
lock. It's got a lock on it. He's like, wow.
It's got a lock that should have been dated back to the 30s.
Sure, why not?
It was huge.
Why not? That's awesome. And there's a hole in the fence, and he sees that there's like this bear trap in it, and he's like, okay, screw that. He hits it with his like suitcase so it fires off, and then he walks into the estate and walks up to the house, and it's all foggy. It's clearly supposed to be spooky, and he just knocks on the door.
He doesn't realize he's being followed either.
Yeah, there is a person that is following him that is veiled. It's a woman, clearly in like this weird veil. He walks up to the door, knocks, no one answers, and he tries the door and it's open. So he walks in and starts going, hello? Hello? There's like a fire in the fireplace.
And then he sees, what's his name?
Yeah, we see Boris Karloff as Nahum Whitley. Mr. Whitley. I always will just say as Mr. Whitley.
I just called him Father through the whole
because it's an anagram of human.
Is that why I didn't like it?
Yeah,
There's just something that I didn't
At
like.
least to me, that's as soon as I saw like it written out, I'm like, well, that's an anagram of human. I don't know if I'm sure they meant that because it's such a strange name. But
I really got mad about Susan at her.
The actress's name is actually Susan.
Susan with a Z instead of an S.
That's okay. That happens. Anyway, we're introduced to Boris Karloff's character, Mr. Whitley, and he says, what in the hell are you doing in my house? You should have known with the gate being locked that no one's welcome here. Get the hell out. And he's like, whoa. I'm here to see Susan. Susan doesn't take guests.
You weren't invited. And he goes, yes, I was.
Yeah, I was. Here's the letter from your wife. Bitch. What is it? What is her name? Like Latita Whitley? Mrs. Whitley.
He always said Mrs. Whitley.
Here's this letter from Mrs. Whitley.
The only time you find his last name is when Boris Karloff's character is named at the end calling for her. Otherwise, it was Mother from Susan.
Yeah.
It was Mrs. Whitley from Steve.
All right. Well, fine. Big deal.
I was just trying to explain why you don't know her name.
Well, Mr. Whitley says, screw you. Mrs. Whitley doesn't take guests either. She's very ill. Get the hell out of my house. And that's when Susan appears at the top of the staircase. And she's like, oh, Steven, you finally made it. Blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out, and I'm going to sum up some scenes, that Susan and him met each other at college. They clearly fell in love. She invited him to come to her home to meet her parents. Okay? Because they are clearly in love, and he is wanting to ask her hand in marriage. That's what it's coming across as. That he came here with that intent. It seemed
like they already had the intent.
Yes, but he hadn't asked their permission, and she likely came across as that her family is fairly old-fashioned. And
not having a wealthy manor because he was shocked.
Not having a wealthy manor?
She didn't tell him that they had this family home that was a fancy manor.
He didn't understand that, yeah, she was actually well off. Now, they don't have very many, like, housekeepers or anything like that in this house. There's, like, a footman and a maid that has gone missing that we learn about. But anyway, Susan now is, like, coming down the stairs, and Mr. Whitley glares at Stephen and goes, "You will accompany her to see my wife, and you will leave right afterwards." Act normal. Like, okay, this is effed up, right? Like, of course, now Mr. Whitley's played by Boris Karloff, so Boris Karloff's giving off that, like, menace that he's able to do so well, even though he's in a wheelchair. The guy's, like, giving off, "I will tear your spine out" kind of feelings.
And then you go up the stairs and you
Yep.
have pictures of Boris Karloff as he would have been older and in an older time.
Yeah, there's like
There's-
paintings all over, and we get Kirk light on the freaking paintings every now and then.
Yes.
Like, yeah, it's great. So Mrs. Whitby is very ill, and she's in her bed that's covered in, like,
Because
silk curtains, or is it like lace curtains?
it's a sheer, like your sheer curtains that you'd have.
Sure. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
It's sheer.
you can see her sort of through these drapes.
And she's having a hard trouble with light, so the room is dark.
Yeah, it's dark. And she says, "Look, whatever you do, Stephen, talk to my husband. I know that you're here to be with Susan, but I want you to take Susan away from here. I know that at this point my husband will have you stay the night because Susan will insist on it. But after tonight, leave with her and never come back." Okay.
Yeah, she makes him promise
Yeah.
that he will do so.
And that's fine. And then there's this whole conversation with an earring that I really don't think matters a whole lot to the story at all. There's an earring that this maid left behind.
Because it's green, and I think she had some of that.
Oh, you're thinking that the green rock is on the earring?
Yes.
Okay. So we then see a scene where Mr. Whitby is wheeled into the basement, and he tells his footman that he needs his help. Okay, so they end up going into this cavern that's like
it's the basement.
It is the basement, but it's like a cavern inside the basement.
Yeah,
And there's like this giant skull chain winch in it that is clearly supposed to be, "Lou, look, I'm evil," but it's still a really cool set. There's like these satanic drawings on the wall, and there's this giant grate that has this pulsing green light coming from it. I'm like, okay, all right, we know what's going to happen now. This whole movie's kind of
But
laid
he's
out.
talking about his brother, Corbin.
No, it's his father.
Oh, is his father?
I thought it was his father.
I didn't get who
So it was
Corbin.
18. He was born in like 1880.
That makes
something.
more sense about seeing the picture,
Yeah,
the portrait, and
because Susan talks about how she didn't really know her grandfather because he died in 1942. And when was Susan the actress born? 1942. Okay, so it makes sense from actors and all that. Anyway, down in the basement, there's this green glow, and it's coming out of this grate that's in the ground. And we learn that the maid is the one that was wearing this veil out there because she disappeared the last time that Mrs. Whitby saw her. She was wearing this veil. She didn't want to be seen, etc., etc.
she had problems with eyesight.
So that evening, dinner is served on silver plates, and it's very, very formal, overly formal, I should say, except that Stephen doesn't really have any formal clothing.
Because all he had was a tiny little suitcase.
Yeah, and Susan doesn't seem to give a crap about it. But Mr. Whitby is like at the head of the table. Everything is served on silver plates. It's like a full silver dinner set. And that to me is why it felt a very overly formal. In that there weren't soup bowls, there were soup plates.
Okay.
Did you notice that?
No, I didn't, but I can understand why.
Hence the formality of it.
I can understand why, because Whitley doesn't want them to have a conversation that's going to take place because Steve is American and he's going to address it anyway. Where
What does it have to do with the soup plates?
It has to do with it's formal and you don't want to bring up.
But how does Steven know the formality of it? See, the only reason
That's
I
why
know
I
that
said
that
it
came-
didn't go off well.
Yeah, it didn't go off, but I think that was purposeful. That
was purposeful.
None of this really seems to impact Steven at all.
No.
Which is fine. For the story, it makes complete sense. So,
But it would make sense for Mr. Whitley to have a formal looking thing. So to try to put a barrier.
Susan is kind of being quiet. She is being quiet and formal, but she's just not wearing something formal, correct?
No, she's not. But she's also learned Americanisms.
Yeah, so there's a scream that's heard, and Steven's like, what was that? And no one says anything.
That's
including Susan, and I'm like, okay, that's a little weird. Then there was a
then he talks about the black spots,
the dead area that's outside, and Mr. Whitley says there was a fire, and he like there's a whole discussion between him and Susan. Susan never actually saw the fire, but it was a fire, and Dad said so therefore there was a fire. And Mr. Whitley was the only one that went out and dealt with this fire, I guess. Like, it's very strange. Everyone should be very aware that there's a lot of things being unsaid.
And it doesn't get said or answered because then
the footman
or butler, when he's got a
Merwin. You know, here's the thing.
A very Welsh name.
It's a very Welsh name, but it sounds like somebody is slurring Merlin.
Yeah, it is.
I actually, in my notes, I wrote down his name was Merlin. It's just that everyone was saying Merwin. It's weird, right? Like, it wasn't just me. I thought his name was Merlin.
That would be Merlin and...
Yeah, Merwin. Anyway,
Merwin is Merlin.
He passes out and he drags all the food right off the table. Like, in this overly dramatic, I'm going to hit the floor. And he does. And Mr. Whitby's like, No, don't worry. I'll take care of him. I know how to handle this. Wait, dude, you're in a goddamn wheelchair.
And then they're going up the two, Steve and Susan are going up the stairs, and that's when you have the Kirk light on the
Kirk light on the
portrait. The painting of the great grandfather or whatever.
Susan sees a figure outside the window, and it's the veiled woman kind of like trying to peer through. She freaks out, but instead kind of like stops and declares her love for Steve. Like, I think she understands that there's really weird things going on at this house, but she doesn't want to talk about it and even wants to distract Steve from it. So everyone hears screaming again, and they decide to finally investigate. Susan can't really ignore it at this point because Steven's there going, come on, folks. I'm tired of hearing all this screaming constantly. What the hell's going on? So they investigate. They go down to the basement, and Mr. Whitby is coming out of a room, and he says, Whitley says, look, Merwin died. Nothing could be done. I did everything I could. And Whitley's acting really creepy and shady.
And they all know that's where the screaming came from.
Yeah. Like, everyone, there's no question.
And won't let you in.
So later on, Stephen sees Whitley slowly pushing his wheelchair. He is walking out of his wheelchair. He can walk. It's just that he has difficulty doing it.
And he's
pushing a heavy case on his wheelchair. Sure. And this is where I started like going, who drives their trash out to the curb and throws it in the trash can and then beats the hell out of it with a stick? Who the hell does that? You know, from the Burbs, where the guy drives the bodies out to the when they're trying to figure out if the guys next door are murderers.
So Steve's
like, dude, Whitley killed this guy and is dumping his body somewhere.
Two weird things. First, Steve opens up the door for Merwin's room, and it's a mess.
Oh, it's trashed, but there is a burnt outline of a human body on the ground that has blood sprayed everywhere, and it's like, whoa.
And this is one of the things I'm going to say is the bad thing is timing in this. For some reason, Mr. Whitley can go almost anywhere and be there.
They set that up though.
Like this.
They set that up.
But on other cases, the time is like it took
because
Mr. Whitley a long time to get out, giving Steve enough time to.
Yes, it's all due to the plot, but there are elevators inside this.
There's an in and out elevator.
At least one. I actually know that there has to be two, because there's the one in the main hall that is that really overly ornate one, but that one does not go into the basement. There is one that goes into the basement that's actually underneath the main stairs. It all makes sense.
And there's a lot of steps that have small steps that have a ramp to them.
Yes.
Over top of the step.
Now, mind you, the only reason that he's in this wheelchair is because Karloff was having extreme back problems at the time. So they rewrote this part so Whitley was actually in a wheelchair for it.
It fit, though.
It fit. It really did fit. I agree.
It fit.
Steven sees this outline, like this Hiroshima-like outline on the ground. It's not quite, because it looks like there's like piles of ashes there instead of just like an outline. And
then he follows
outside. Whitley is digging a shallow grave, and then Steven sees that the greenhouse is glowing green in the darkness.
Greenhouse! It's a true greenhouse!
Yeah, I'm like, oh, it's a greenhouse. Wow. This comes up in a later scene where Steven's like, the only time I've ever seen a glow like that was in a radiation lab. And then,
so you know that he studied science. He did a lot of
science. But they did talk about that they were both going to university for some sort of science. Regardless, the fact is that Stephen recognizes this as some sort of radioactive glow, and his ass doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all.
Yeah, and then there's
some pretty horrific things that happen in this movie.
And walks to town. Is that the next thing?
No. Stephen is attacked by the maid who has now we see actually has a very scarred face. Now he's like,
that's on the way to.
Is this where her face ends up melting?
The maid. You never see the maid's face melt, do you? You see the mother's.
We see Mrs. Whitley's, spoiler, that her face melts later on. But I thought the maid's face melts at some point.
She's got some like growth going on her face.
Yeah. So anyway, he does go into town to look for a doctor to talk with, because he's like, I need an objective opinion, and a doctor is the person I need to talk to. Now, the doctor that he finds is an alcoholic. Drunk. He's an alcoholic, and he's like, what are you talking about, man? I think there was a murder up at this house. What house? The Whitley house. I'm not helping you. Screw you. Get out of my house.
And then he finds out from his housekeeper or his wife, I don't know which one it is, that everything went bad when Carbon died.
In the 40s. Like in 1942.
I don't know what time it was. It does tell you, because he shows the
gravestone.
The gravestone.
It's 1942.
Is it?
Yeah. So, yeah, she says that, hey, look, all this stuff was going on. It all went bad in the 1940s. Susan and Stephen end up checking out the greenhouse, and they're able to sneak inside.
Because he tells her all about that night.
Yeah, this is all screwed up. So they go into the greenhouse, and it turns out it's a really cool looking greenhouse inside, except all the plants are huge. And I go, Darlene, Day of the Triffids.
Yes, but that's also part of the book.
What?
The growth near the
color? The color mutates things.
Oh, is it that it mutates?
It changes things.
I thought it also grew them big.
Not necessarily.
But you couldn't eat it.
It could.
And they had some huge ass tomatoes.
So he's like, okay, well, this is really strange. Is this where they end up? No, okay, so they hear a scream coming from the attached potting shed.
Yes.
Like, okay, we're going to go check that out. He looks inside and he goes, there's that glow inside. So they open it up, and there's this box of like flashing colors. But honestly, they don't freaking notice at first the fact that like there's cages filled with giant mutant animals.
Oh, and the one looks so sad.
Yeah, one looks like sad, and these are actually really good, creepy looking mutant animals.
It looks like somebody melted something.
Yeah, it looks like these creatures were like melted and stuck together. It actually is kind of horrific. I'll be honest. For 1965,
But
these things
there
are
was
really
this one
awful
that
looking.
was
No, I mean awful in a good way.
so cute because he had these big, huge eyes, and it was just looking like
It looks
I'm
like it was in pain. Yeah,
pain.
kill me.
Please kill me.
And he's like, oh my god, so this must be radiation from this box mutating all these animals. Because,
And then he digs into the pot.
Then they end up going into the pots of the plants out there and finding these green crystals that are buried in the soil. And he's like, they're warm. And I'm like, you idiot. You know about radiation, and you're acting like a complete
At
asshole.
least he did pick it up with a shove.
Yeah, but then he was like putting his hand right over it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man, dude.
They're not going to have kids.
And now the Triffids attack, and they attack Susan, and he hacks at them with this trowel, right, to cut the vines that have wrapped around him.
And he hits the tree that the vines are on.
Yeah.
And it cuts open, and you got green goo coming. Because it's hollow. Remember I said it was hollow?
Yeah. So these things are giving off heat. Whitley ends up showing up down in the cellar, and they find... Well, okay, so Stephen ends up finding this glowing hole in the basement. He knows it all has to be in the basement. All this stuff has to be in the basement. Whitley shows up and tells Stephen to get the hell out. They both hear Susan screaming upstairs. Stephen finds her, and we see that it's actually Susan's mother, and her face is melting off. And
there's
it turns
that whole chase.
Yeah, there's a chase through the house. But anyway, she dies, and her face is just melting right off. So Whitley goes into the basement and smashes the rock, knowing that the glowing rock thing that's in the ground down there needs to be destroyed.
After discussion with Steve.
And the maid, this is where the maid is. The maid attacks him trying to stop him because I guess she's crazy. But he ends up killing her by tossing her into... Well, she falls into the pit with the rock in it. And then he gets some of the rock on him, and it, infects him.
Yeah, at the neck, and it blisters up.
Yeah, and he, starts glowing green and, shimmering. And this is bad. So he comes up out of the basement, and he looks like a glowing metallic green radioactive beast at this point.
It looked like to me that somebody stuck aluminum foil on somebody
it wasn't.
with a
So Stephen and Whitley fight, and Susan runs. Whitley falls off the stairwell and basically shatters on the ground. He shatters, and there's sparks and green fire, and they're like, oh crap, we need to get the hell out of here. So Susan and Stephen run out.
Oh, and she had to slip and fall, so he had to rescue her. We
should run and never ever look back, Susan. Never look back. And she's like, that's a good idea. Let's go. The end. It seems like I'm being a little flippant because I still, like I said, I love this movie.
And then you have the painting burn.
Oh yeah, the painting burn with the Kirk light on its eyes. Yeah, yep. But the end. I love this movie. This movie was fantastic because it has the hallmarks of most British science fiction horror movies of the time. It honestly is creepy. It gives me Day of the Triffids realness. It has Boris Karloff in it, being Boris Karloff. He's not at the height of his powers, but Boris Karloff still can give that menace really well, even being in a wheelchair. Correct?
Yes.
What worked in this movie for you, Darlene? Before
I already said it.
Say it again. Let's sum it up.
I liked the sets. I liked the acting. I liked the matte painting.
The acting is great. The sets are stellar, 10 out of 10.
The atmosphere was great.
Atmosphere, yes. The feel of the movie, the texture in your mouth, so to speak. The texture of this movie. There's
one thing that I gotta say, why do they keep leaving the doors open?
For what? Which doors?
Okay, when he walks in the house.
Oh yeah, all the doors are unlocked. Yeah.
He leaves the door wide open and the fog just comes in. And they do this over and over again. They leave doors. There's the storm coming in and they leave the door open. I'm like, what were you, born in a barn?
Almost everything about this movie actually works. almost all of it. Not all of it, because I will still bitch about parts of the plot just seemingly don't make a ton of sense. Like the beginning, the villagers should have said something about why.
I said that already.
Yeah, I know, but I agree. The villagers don't make a whole bunch of sense. The doctor, like, fine. He's just kind of belligerent and drunk, but that's halfway through the
And
movie.
he's having trauma.
Yeah, he's been clearly traumatized.
Now, I was expecting something to come out of the drunk tavern people,
Sure.
as them making fun of the fact that he's wanting to go there, and
Yeah, because they were laughing, and I'm like,
then
let us in on the joke. You know, like I get it because I know Color from Outer, from Beyond Space. I kind of understand what's going to happen, but if I was 10-year-old so and so in 1965 watching this movie, who's likely never been exposed to H.P. Lovecraft, I don't understand what the hell's going on.
why would a 10-year-old be watching this?
Because it's 1965, Darlene. What films did I watch when I was 10?
I know, but I wouldn't let it.
Scarier things than this, because this was pretty damn mild.
I don't know if I'd let a 10-year, well, maybe a 10-year-old, but not.
Like a 5-year-old I wouldn't let watch,
No.
just because somebody's face melts in it. And there's like the scary monsters that are in the cages, the mutated animals that you just feel bad for. I felt bad for them. I wasn't scared about those things. I just felt bad for them.
They were behind
bars and like
they even
in
had
pain.
bars downstairs.
Yeah, I'm sure it's to keep these like animals in that he's mutating. I don't know. It's awful.
The only thing I could come up, they never say what the animals were, but
Does it matter?
You're like, all the.
Does it matter? They might have been people even. I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. They're not. They're nothing. They're just.
Well, that would explain why the village don't want to talk, because anyone that goes out there
just gets like thrown into the cages,
but that
and
would
absorbed by the Cronenberg monsters.
It would make sense of why they, it doesn't make sense of why they wouldn't say, you don't want to go there.
You don't want to go there. No one comes back.
Yeah, that would be
like, they could have just said that. I know I've known 2 or 3 people that have gone up there and they've never come back. The postman doesn't even go up there anymore.
Yeah, that
could have been something, just an offhand remark like that. Like the postman, he's like, nope, I'd rather lose my job than go up there. I just leave the mail here in town for them. When they want to come down and get it, they can get it. Like simple little lines like that would have actually improved the movie a bit in the beginning. I will also say there's one thing that I have to mention. It's not something that doesn't work, but the way that this movie was processed to widescreen back in the day is with this weird lens that they refiltered the movie through. So when the movie is panning across a shot, it looks like a fisheye right at the edges of the screen. There's like this weird warping right at the edges. And it was distracting to me just because the first time I saw it ended up making me look for it all the time because it's so weird. But then again, it might have added to the strangeness of the film that, like, just out of the corner of your eye, things aren't right. That could have helped actually with it and helped me enjoy the movie. Honestly, the only thing that doesn't work are some of the plot points with like the villagers, or it's really simple for Boris Karloff to get around, even though he's in the wheelchair. Yes, he can. We see him getting out of the wheelchair. He can walk on his own. It's just that he has difficulty doing it.
It's just that all of a sudden he was upstairs faster than the person that could walk up the steps could go.
And I think there could have been a little bit more dealt with, like Corwin Whitley. And was he like a Satanist before The Rock came down or after The Rock came down?
I think it was before. Because if you remember right, at the end, Mr. Whitley says that he called it.
He called it down? So like one of the elder gods sent The Rock?
That's what it seemed like to me. Or somebody said he called it.
Okay.
And then there's that book that they're going through that I got to laugh about because it's supposed to be really old, and the letters are like
like
an
Gothic.
Inch. It's written in like an inch thing, and if you write in old books, paper was very expensive back in the day.
I think it was more for show, that book, not for purpose, because obviously it's for the movie to give an impression to the viewer rather than be realistic. Regardless, I think it was purposely made that way by
So they
Corwin.
could film it.
Yeah.
But it made me go,
It's weird.
yeah.
It's weird, but you know what? The whole movie is weird. Darlene, I might actually even say that this is the best adaptation of Lovecraft's work on screen that I've seen. Not that I've seen a ton.
I haven't seen a ton, but I would
Well,
say
okay,
yes.
remember the Reanimator movies?
Yes.
Those are an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation.
Okay.
I think this is better than Reanimator. And some people might scream at me. But then again, remember, folks, I don't like a ton of icky, gooey body horror stuff. I think that just kind of distracts from the actual horror that Lovecraft should be giving, which is the existential dread. And this gives a bit of the dread, but not in the way it should. But what I'm trying to say is it still gives some of that dread. It does a fairly good job at giving you dread. And then you see the weirdness in the greenhouse. And then you're like, okay, things are strange. This is bad. Those creatures are honestly unsettling. They're not icky, gooey body horror crap, which I hate. They're just unsettling. It's hard to not praise this movie. I want to keep praising it because it's really good.
I like how they made Susan be away for 4 years, so she's
normal?
She's normal and she's not in tune with anything that's going on.
She's completely clueless to half the stuff that's going. But I mean, the screaming of things that she's purposely ignoring means that she has to have been exposed to the screaming enough that she's desensitized to it. That it's only Steven that seems to be really registering the fact that there's just random screaming. Every little piece of this film is interesting. Even the scenes in the village with the poorly done villagers, I was interested in because there's tiny little pieces of 1960s England in it. Like, hey, just like in the day the Earth died screaming. That's what I'm trying to say. There's tons of that 1960s stuff, but we see all those same streets, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this is the pub that they were at, that they took shelter in.
Yeah, this one is called, and I think it has the same name, The Sun.
It's called The Sun. Yeah, I forget what it is in the Earth dies screaming, but I want now, if we ever go back to England, I want to go to this little village and actually see if we can find that place.
You are always into doing that.
Finding really strange places where movies have been shot, and you're like, oh look, this is really obscure. This is where the Cyberman came out of the
yes, he made me take a picture
cover in London, and I'm like pointing at the manhole, and you're like, Aaron, God damn it, why do you do this? And I'm like, because I enjoyed this piece of entertainment. And the fact is that I can walk somewhere in real life and actually go, that's the place, and feel that connection to that entertainment. It's like going to the Ghostbusters Firehouse in New York City. You even enjoy doing that. You're like, oh, yeah, it's the Ghostbusters Firehouse. That's pretty cool.
I like but then I see it with an architectural.
Yeah, because it's a beautiful architecture thing. Yeah, but
yes.
I mean, I'd like to do that.
So
that would be a lot of fun.
I was
for this
liking
movie.
it for other reasons than just.
Well, I was geeking out about Ghostbusters.
He was geeking out.
But anyway, with this movie, I would want to go to Surrey and look for this little village.
It didn't make me feel so bad because somebody else was geeking out. Just like he takes a picture of the last
police box in London.
And there's somebody there
that's just totally geeking out about it too.
It doesn't make me feel so bad when there's somebody else there. But when he does it in everybody else is staring at us.
I'm like, do you remember this place? It was in this really obscure 80s film. And yeah, come on.
You know that.
You enjoyed seeing the last police box too, so don't start. And then 2 years later, they even reference that police box being there in Doctor Who because the unit freaked out and went and grabbed this police box thinking it was the Doctor's TARDIS. because it's really there. That really is a police box. Anyway, we love this movie. We recommend it, right? Like out of 10, out of 10. We both recommend it, but out of 10.
7?
Really, you're going that low, honestly. Jeez, Darlene, I would say 8.5 to 9. This honestly is the movie I'm going to judge other H.P. Lovecraft adaptations against, at least for now.
Yes, it would be.
This was fantastic. This was well acted. It has atmosphere. It has meat. It has grain. It has what can I say? Like it's a 4-course meal. This movie, I really appreciated it. What else can we say? Nothing. I don't want to keep babbling about it. Go and watch Die Monster Die from 1965. It's free on Amazon Prime. Please watch it.
It's not on Tubi.
No, it's not on Tubi. We were looking for it on Tubi, but it's on Amazon Prime. Please go watch it. Tell us about it. Tell us if you kind of agree with us on how good this movie is. I will say, since this is episode 143, 143, this might be in the top 10 movies that we've done for Earth versus Sue.
I don't know. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's a lot of the classics, but at the very least, this is a movie I think is an unsung... it's a gem that came out kind of like Monolith Monsters, where we're like, oh my god, more people need to watch Monolith Monsters. This was way better than it had a right being. This is one of those, like, oh, it's an unfound gem. This is a gem. Watch this, please. So I'm Aaron.
I'm Darlene. Good evening.
And keep watching the skies.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.